Imagine this. You're flipping through late-night TV, just looking for background noise, when you stumble across something that stops you cold. It's grainy, silent CCTV footage, just a convenience store camera on an ordinary street, recording what seems like another uneventful night. But then you see it. A figure moves through the frame. At first, it looks normal. Just someone shopping until the moment they turn toward the camera. What you see in their eyes, even through the blur of security footage, makes your stomach drop. There's no emotion, no hesitation, just cold calculation. And then, out of nowhere, something horrifying happens. Something that wasn't meant to be seen. Something that changes everything. That's the footage we're going to show you. But trust me, you're going to want to watch every second, because buried in this video is the clue that cracked open a twisted case no one saw coming. Hey, I know videos like this can be tough to watch. And you might be wondering, why am I here? Why should I keep watching? Well, if you've ever had that deep, uneasy feeling that someone isn't who they say they are, if you've ever trusted the wrong person, if you've ever had your gut scream that something just doesn't add up, then this story is going to hit home. Because at the center of this true crime case is a man who hid in plain sight, who played the role of a neighbor, a friend, even a hero, until one moment of surveillance footage exposed his darkest truth. And the wild part? You'll see the exact second the investigators realized everything they believed was a lie. That single moment changed the entire course of the investigation, and it's going to change the way you look at people around you. Now let me talk to you for a second. You didn't click this video by accident. Something about the title, maybe even that thumbnail, told you this was worth your time. And I promise you it is. You're not just watching a story unfold. You're becoming a part of an investigation that shook an entire community to its core. I'm taking you step by step, showing you how one piece of overlooked evidence, a single camera angle, blew the lid off a murder that almost went unsolved. And yeah, we're going to go deep. Into the mind of the killer. Into the lives of the victims. Into the moment where a detective followed his instinct instead of the evidence and found something everyone else missed. If you're someone who loves crime scene breakdowns, criminal psychology, or real-life mystery with twists that you won't see coming, this is your case. Stay with me till the end, and I'll show you not just how they caught him, but why they almost didn't. From the very start, everything about this case felt off. The victim was well known in the neighborhood, a local artist named Rachel Bennett. Kind, creative, always surrounded by people. Her sudden disappearance didn't just shock her community. It rattled it. But it wasn't just that she was missing. It was the silence that followed. No signs of struggle. No obvious suspects. No break-ins. Just gone. Like she vanished into thin air. But then, almost by chance, police reviewed hours of CCTV from nearby locations. They weren't even expecting to find anything. But one detective, Detective Carla Monroe, noticed something others didn't. A man walking a little too fast, glancing over his shoulder a little too often. At 3:17 a.m., a single frame caught him glancing directly at the camera, and in that frozen second, something in his face told her this wasn't just a neighbor taking a late-night stroll. And here's where it gets chilling, because that same man had already been interviewed. Twice. He'd even helped put up missing posters for Rachel. He shook hands with her family, hugged her mother. But when the footage surfaced, everything changed. The way he moved, the exact path he took, the timing. It matched too perfectly with the estimated timeline of her disappearance. And still, no one wanted to believe it. Because this guy? He was the nice guy. The harmless one. The kind who offered to mow lawns for free and volunteered at the local animal shelter. The one everyone liked. But cameras don't lie, and what they caught next shook the lead detective to her core. This footage, which we're going to walk through together, shows something no one could have prepared for. And it doesn't just expose what happened that night. It uncovers what had been hiding under the surface for years. Because this wasn't his first time. And had it not been for this camera, it wouldn't have been his last. You're going to get the answer you came here for. You're going to see the evidence with your own eyes. You're going to understand what truly happened. But just when you think you've figured it out, I'll warn you, this case takes a turn. A massive one. One that made even the seasoned investigators question everything they thought they knew. And it all starts with one question. What was he really doing out there that night? Stick with me. Because once you see what the CCTV reveals next, you won't be able to look away. Wanting to continue with the next section of the story? Just weeks before Rachel Bennett disappeared, everything in her life seemed to be falling into place. She'd recently celebrated her 34th birthday with close friends at a local wine bar just outside of town, a small, cozy place where everyone knew her name. The night was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and inside jokes that only a tight-knit group could understand. She was working on a new series of paintings inspired by her late grandmother's diaries, and people in the local art scene had started to take real notice. Her social media following was growing steadily, especially on TikTok and Instagram, where she posted behind-the-scenes videos of her process, time-lapse of her paintings, and occasional updates about her life. Her posts radiated calm and confidence. There were no hints, no dark undertones, nothing that hinted at the horror that would soon unfold. Yet, looking back now, there were shadows hiding just outside the frame. Things that didn't make sense at the time suddenly seemed chilling in retrospect. Rachel had a small circle of close friends, but she also had a few acquaintances who didn't always sit right with people. One of them was Aaron Cole. He wasn't exactly a friend, more like a friend of a friend who had started showing up at her gallery openings and community events. He was quiet, polite, maybe a little too observant. People said he had a strange energy about him, like he was always calculating something. He'd recently moved into the building next to Rachel's, claiming he was a freelance web developer trying to find peace away from the city. Rachel, always kind, tried to make him feel welcome. She invited him to local mixers, offered to connect him with others in the area, even helped him decorate his new place with some prints from her studio. But friends said she'd started to feel uneasy around him, especially after he began appearing in places he shouldn't be, like at her favorite coffee shop before she even mentioned it online, or outside the community center during an art class she hadn't publicized. She joked about it once, saying he had a psychic stalker sense. But now, nobody's laughing. Then there was Tyler Monroe, Detective Monroe's son, and Rachel's ex-boyfriend. Their breakup had been quiet but strange, ending abruptly after 2 years together. They'll make you question everything we've told you so far. Every alibi, every motive, every face you thought you trusted. Want me to keep going into the next part of the story? As Detective Carla Monroe began piecing the fragments of Rachel's disappearance together, she hit what felt like her first major breakthrough. The second appearance of the man in the CCTV footage, returning hours later with what looked like a bag slung over his shoulder, raised immediate red flags. The timestamp aligned perfectly with the window in which investigators now believed Rachel had vanished. The footage, captured from a streetlight-mounted camera owned by the city's traffic department, was supposed to automatically upload to a secure cloud server every 12 hours. Yet, when Carla went back to retrieve a higher-resolution version of the clip, it was gone. Not corrupted. Not accidentally deleted. Completely erased from the archive without a trace. The technician responsible for managing the footage swore up and down that it had been properly stored and couldn't explain how only that segment, those exact 22 minutes, had been wiped. It was the kind of deletion that required access credentials and a specific knowledge of the system, which meant someone knew what was on that footage. And they didn't want it seen. Carla, not one to scare easily, started to feel the pressure building. She'd seen cover-ups before, political cases, high-profile business figures trying to bury scandal, but never like this. There was no clear benefit to hiding the footage. Unless, of course, it didn't just implicate a killer, but someone with power. Someone connected. And then, right when she was about to brief her captain with her theory, something even stranger happened. Her car, normally locked in the precinct lot, was broken into. Nothing was stolen. Not her badge, not her laptop, not even the cash in the glove box. Just one item was touched, her notebook. The one she used to write her private thoughts, her suspicions, her theories not yet ready to be shared. The pages had been flipped through, and a sticky note was left on the dashboard. One word, scribbled in all caps, stop. Carla didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Part of her feared they'd say she was being paranoid. But another part, one that had been sharpened by years of chasing killers, told her she was being watched. And not just by anyone. By someone inside. Someone who knew how the system worked, who had access to confidential case materials, and who was actively obstructing her every move. That's when she began to look more closely at her own team. Not all of them had airtight alibis for the night Rachel went missing. One officer in particular, Ben Mathers, had been acting increasingly defensive during briefings, pushing back against Carla's decisions, insisting they were wasting time on CCTV leads. He claimed he'd been homesick that night, but his swipe card was used at the precinct gym at 3:48 a.m., nearly the same time the man on the footage returned to the scene. When confronted, Ben claimed someone must have borrowed his card. A mistake. A mix-up. But Carla couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something deeper than just a poorly timed lie. Adding another layer of complexity, Rachel's best friend, Lila Granger, came forward with a confession that nearly derailed the investigation. Through tears, she admitted that Rachel had been on edge the week before her disappearance because she discovered a hidden USB drive in her apartment. It was buried behind a false panel in an old art supply box, something Rachel hadn't opened in years. The drive was password protected, and Rachel had only managed to see a few folders before locking it away again. According to Lila, Rachel thought the contents might be connected to her father's mysterious death 20 years earlier, a case ruled accidental but never fully explained. Rachel never got a chance to bring it to the police. And now, the drive was gone. Taken from the same apartment that hadn't shown a single sign of forced entry. Then came the twist that nobody saw coming. A sealed juvenile record was accidentally flagged during a routine background check tied to Rachel's social media activity. Someone had filed a privacy petition on her behalf years ago, an anonymous request to seal documents from when she was just 14. The details were sketchy, buried deep in an outdated system, but one name kept appearing in the metadata of the old case files: Aaron Cole. The quiet neighbor. The one who had been circling her life from the moment he moved into town. It turned out, he and Rachel had known each other before. Long before she ever moved into that neighborhood. They had grown up just a few towns apart, and while no public record tied them together, that sealed juvenile case did. The truth of what happened between them back then remains locked behind red tape, but what's undeniable is that Aaron hadn't just stumbled into her life by accident. He had followed her. Quietly. Strategically. And the more Carla dug, the more she found that Aaron's past was far darker than anyone could have imagined. But just when it seemed like the investigation was finally gaining momentum, Carla received a call that changed everything. Lila, Rachel's best friend, her most vocal advocate, the one who'd claimed to be fighting for justice, was gone. Not missing. Not dead. Just disappeared. Her phone was found abandoned at a rest stop 3 hours away. No note. No evidence of struggle. Just one odd detail. A message saved in her drafts folder that read, "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." And now, everything Carla thought she knew has been thrown into question. Who can she trust? What really happened between Rachel and Aaron all those years ago? Why did the footage vanish? And what secret was Lila so desperate to hide? Because somewhere in this tangled web of lies, betrayal, and long-buried truths, the real killer is still watching. Still waiting. And what happens next might be worse than anything we've seen so far. Do you want me to continue with the next section where the truth begins to unravel? As Detective Carla Monroe struggled to make sense of Lila's abrupt disappearance, a chilling realization set in. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. The web had grown larger, more intricate, and far more dangerous. And just when Carla thought the case couldn't twist any tighter, another unexpected threat emerged, threatening to completely unravel what little clarity she had. A man named Daniel Mercer walked into the station that following morning. Middle-aged, well-dressed, and visibly anxious, he asked to speak to Carla in private. He wasn't on any suspect list, had no known connection to Rachel, and wasn't from the area. But the moment he began speaking, Carla felt the weight of his words sink into her like ice water. "I think I was supposed to be next." Daniel had received an anonymous email the night before. No subject, no signature, just a time-stamped image. It was a still from a traffic camera showing Rachel walking down the same street where she was last seen. Underneath it, in plain black text, were the words, You don't remember, but she did. He swore he had no idea who Rachel was. He lived in a neighboring state, had never been to this town, and had zero ties to anyone connected to the investigation. But the way he described the panic he felt upon seeing that image, the immediate feeling that someone was watching him, listening in, Carla couldn't ignore it. A deeper dive into Rachel's laptop history, something that had previously seemed irrelevant, revealed something strange. A hidden partition in her hard drive stored an encrypted file folder labeled DM. The encryption was military grade, but the title, the initials, they lined up too perfectly with Daniel Mercer to be coincidence. Yet, when confronted, Daniel remained adamant. He said the only DM he ever knew was a high school friend named Denise Marks, and he hadn't spoken to her in over 20 years. Still, something about his demeanor didn't sit right. He kept glancing at the windows, flinching when the station door opened, constantly checking his phone as if expecting something or someone to find him. Carla's instinct screamed that this man wasn't just another pawn. He was connected to Rachel's past, whether he remembered it or not. So she pushed harder, digging into his background, and soon found a sealed juvenile court document filed in his name at age 16, matching the same time frame as Rachel's own sealed case. But before she could request access through the proper legal channels, she got word that Daniel had checked himself out of a nearby motel and vanished. He left behind no credit card activity, no phone pings, nothing. Almost like he knew she'd come looking and didn't want to be found. And then came another blow. Carla returned to her office to find a manila envelope left under her chair. No postage, no name. Inside were photocopies of crime scene photos from a completely unrelated case, an unsolved double homicide from 17 years ago involving a young couple murdered in their cabin just outside of town. Both victims had no known enemies, no motive, no leads. Their case went cold fast. The only connection? A teenage girl had been reported missing in the area on the same day, and her name was Rachel. But the ages didn't align. It couldn't be this Rachel unless she'd been using a false identity all along. That theory seemed impossible. Until Carla called the university registrar and discovered that Rachel's enrollment documents, transcripts, and even her emergency contact information had all been submitted manually. No digital records before her transfer 2 years ago. And the contact listed? Lila Granger. But Lila never went to that school. She didn't even live in that city. Now Carla was forced to ask questions she never thought she'd have to. Who really was Rachel? Was she a victim? Or had she been running from something this entire time? And if she wasn't who she claimed to be, then what exactly had she uncovered that got her killed? The more Carla examined the clues, the more things began to feel deliberately placed, like someone wanted her to find these breadcrumbs, wanted her to follow a trail. But to what? To justice or into a trap? Meanwhile, whispers within the department began to circulate. Talks of an internal affairs audit, claims that Carla was taking liberties with evidence, rumors that someone had lodged an anonymous complaint against her. Every new piece of evidence she tried to enter into the case file seemed to disappear or reappear altered. Her captain, normally supportive, began pulling her from the front lines of the case, citing departmental optics and procedural concerns. It was becoming obvious. Someone on the inside wanted her out. And they were using every tool they had to make sure she either backed off or burned out. And just when she felt the case couldn't twist further, Carla received a late-night call from a block number. The voice on the other end was shaky, distorted by a voice changer, but the message was unmistakable. "You're not looking at the right people," it said. "You're looking too far. The answers are closer than you think. One of your own was there the night she disappeared. You already know who. You just don't want to believe it." Suddenly, all the late-night surveillance footage, the missing timestamps, the deleted files, the planted notes, the careful manipulation, it pointed to someone embedded deep within the force. A partner. A colleague. Someone Carla trusted. And now, she's left to wonder, has she been chasing the wrong ghost all along? The rain had started again, heavy, relentless, as if the sky itself had grown tired of holding in its secrets. Detective Carla Monroe sat in her car outside her apartment complex, fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, unable to move. Her heart thudded, with an unease that had burrowed deep into her chest. The distorted voice from the call still echoed in her head, and with every second that passed, the dread clawed in closer. She had replayed the message a dozen times, each time more convinced that this wasn't just another lead. This was a warning, and not one meant to scare her off the case. It was a threat wrapped in riddles, meant to rattle her sense of trust. "You already know who." The phrase stuck to her thoughts like tar, taunting her, suggesting that her instincts had been right all along, but her fear of betrayal had blinded her. She finally stepped out into the downpour, her jacket doing little to keep her dry as she reached her door. The hallway was darker than usual. One of the lights flickered near her unit, humming softly like a whisper of something unseen. When she slid her key into the lock, she noticed the smallest detail that nearly escaped her attention: a smear on the handle. Not visible unless the porch light hit it just right. It looked like grease, or maybe something worse. Her stomach flipped. With her gun drawn, she pushed the door open and swept the apartment. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of forced entry. But then she noticed the framed photo on her nightstand. Her and her younger brother Nathan at a childhood birthday party had been turned around. Not fallen. Not broken. Deliberately turned so the image faced the wall. That's when she knew someone had been inside. And they wanted her to know it. The panic set in slowly, creeping like a shadow under the skin. Nathan was the only family Carla had left, a firefighter station just 3 hours away in the same state. She hadn't spoken to him in a few days, not unusual. But now, silence felt sinister. She tried his phone. No answer. Texted. Nothing. Called again. Voicemail. She tried the station he worked at, and that's when her hands started to shake. The woman on the line said Nathan hadn't reported for his last shift. They figured he'd taken a personal day. No one had heard from him since the night before. No pings from his phone. No activity on his credit cards. And just like Lila, he was gone. This wasn't coincidence. This was personal. Someone was sending Carla a message loud and clear. Stop digging, or the people you love disappear. She collapsed onto the edge of her bed, soaked through, mind spiraling with questions she couldn't answer fast enough. Had Nathan been targeted because of her? Or had he known something? Been somewhere he shouldn't have been? Her brother had always kept his distance from her cases, respecting boundaries. But now a memory surfaced, something she'd brushed off at the time. A voicemail Nathan had left a week ago, the one she never got around to listening to until now. Hands trembling, she pulled up the message and hit play. At first, it was just his voice, upbeat, casual. "Hey Car, I know you're probably knee-deep in something crazy like always, but I think I saw something weird. At that gas station off I-86 near the old quarry. I stopped for gas, and I think I saw that girl you posted about last month. The missing one. The one with the camera footage? Rachel something? I wasn't sure, but she looked scared. I didn't want to make it a thing, but static cut the rest off." The message was incomplete, corrupted. But it was enough to confirm her worst fear. Nathan had stumbled onto something, and now, like Rachel and Lila, he was gone. Carla pressed her palms to her face, trying to suppress the rising tide of dread. This case had never just been about a missing girl. It was about covering up something far more sinister, and now the cover-up had extended its reach to the people in her life.
But why?
What was Rachel connected to that was worth silencing anyone who came near it? She went back to the evidence board in her living room. Read string webbed between names, photos, and timelines. Rachel, Lila, Aaron, Daniel Mercer, and now Nathan. A new image slipped from the board and fluttered to the floor. She picked it up. It was one of the older security stills, zoomed, grainy, but it clearly showed the mystery man's wrist, and what she had once dismissed as a bracelet now looked like a badge lanyard tucked under a coat. The insignia wasn't visible, but it could have belonged to almost any government agency. And now she began to question everything she thought she knew about this man. Maybe he wasn't just a stalker. Maybe he wasn't acting alone. What if he was sanctioned? What if Rachel hadn't just stumbled on a family secret but a classified one? Suddenly, the lights in her apartment flickered. Once, twice, before dying entirely. The hum of her refrigerator stopped. Her computer screen went black. Power outage, she told herself. But then her phone buzzed with a single alert. Camera motion detected at front door. She looked up at the screen in time to see a shadow move across the lens. The camera blurred slightly, like someone had smeared grease over it. Then the feed went black. Carla backed away from the door, gun still in hand, heart racing. She had always assumed she would see the killer coming, that there would be a chase, a confrontation. But now, she was beginning to understand the truth. The killer didn't need to come after her directly. They were already inside her world, pulling strings, erasing footprints, replacing facts with shadows. And they were close. Closer than she had ever imagined. But the question remained, was she the next target, or just another pawn in a game she didn't yet understand? And as the storm raged outside, and the shadows inched deeper into her walls, Carla began to realize something terrifying. The killer wasn't hiding in the dark anymore. They were walking straight through it. The power returned just as suddenly as it had gone out, flooding the apartment in cold, artificial light. Carla blinked, heart hammering in her chest, the weight of the moment settling like fog around her. She stood frozen for a second longer before finally crossing to her desk and grabbing her laptop. She needed to check the security feed, even if she was afraid of what she might find. When the footage loaded, it picked up about 30 seconds before the blackout. Nothing but rain, her doorstep, and then movement. A figure entered the frame, head down, obscured by a hood. But then, just as the person reached toward the camera, the image briefly froze and glitched. In that momentary flicker, the system had auto-corrected and clarified a single still frame, one that sent a chill crawling up her spine. She leaned in, zooming on the figure's hand. The jacket was familiar. Not vaguely familiar, but intimately familiar. It was a department-issued windbreaker. NYPD. And not just any generic copy either. She recognized the torn patch near the elbow, something she had sewn herself years ago for someone she knew better than anyone. Her old partner, Detective Adrian Keller. For a split second, Carla couldn't breathe. The man she had trusted with her life on more than one occasion, the one who backed her through impossible cases, who swore he had her six when the department turned political, was now appearing on her surveillance footage in the dead of night, outside her home, minutes before her brother vanished and the power went out. It didn't make sense. Adrian had left the force 2 years ago after a failed operation wrecked both their careers. They hadn't spoken since. But now she had to wonder whether his disappearance from her life hadn't been an escape from the fallout, but a deliberate withdrawal into something darker. She played the clip again. Slower. Frame by frame. This time, she caught another detail. Right before the feed cut off, the hood slipped back just a little, and she saw enough to recognize the angle of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. It was Adrian. There was no doubt now. But why was he here? The question bounced around in her head until it broke apart into pieces. Every memory they shared began to feel suspicious in retrospect. The way he had subtly discouraged her from digging into Rachel's case at the start. The time he brushed off the gas station tip as a dead end, when Carla had thought there was something there. The coincidence of him resigning right after a whistleblower disappeared from their precinct. What if Adrian wasn't just watching her? What if he was trying to manage her? Before she could process that, her phone buzzed again. A blocked number. With a sense of grim certainty, she answered. "I told you to stop," said a low, familiar voice. It was him. Adrian. "You don't understand what you're stepping into," he continued, sounding more worn down than threatening. "This isn't just about Rachel. Or Nathan. It goes way higher. You're not equipped to fight this." "What did you do to my brother?" Carla demanded, fury and fear tearing through her. A long pause. "I'm trying to protect him," Adrian said. "I didn't hurt Nathan. But if you keep going down this path, the people behind all of this, they won't stop at warnings. You were never supposed to see that footage. Rachel recorded something she never should have captured. That's why she's gone." "Then tell me what she saw," Carla snapped. "I can't," he said, tone final. "I sign things. The kind of things that bury people in closed files and sealed hearings." She was shaking, gripping the phone so hard it might snap. "Then why come to my door? Why warn me now?" "Because," Adrian replied quietly, "they already think I've told you too much. And if they come after me, I want you to understand the truth, even if you don't hear it from me." The line went dead. Carla stood still, adrenaline surging through her. The one person she had cut out of her life to protect her sanity was now at the center of a conspiracy she didn't even understand. A conspiracy that tied together a missing girl, a dead whistleblower, her vanished brother, and a former cop who had once been her closest ally. She rushed back to her board, flipping through the stack of old interview transcripts and scene photos. Suddenly, one grainy surveillance still from the convenience store near the quarry caught her eye again. She had seen it 100 times. But now her brain saw something different. In the mirror behind the clerk, barely noticeable, was a reflection, a man standing at the end of the aisle, wearing a hood, holding a camera. Rachel hadn't been the only one recording that night. And just like that, the entire narrative began to crack. What if Rachel's disappearance had never been about what she saw, but about what someone else had seen her record? What if Rachel wasn't just a victim? What if she was part of something much more twisted? And as the storm outside began to quiet, Carla finally realized the truth that terrified her most. She had been asking the wrong questions all along. Carla stared at the reflection in the dusty window pane, her own face barely recognizable. She had dark circles under her eyes, her hands trembled involuntarily, and her thoughts felt like a maze with no exits. Sleep hadn't come in days. Not since the night her brother vanished. Not since Adrian's voice broke through the silence to upend every belief she had clung to. The deeper she dug, the less sense anything made. And now, she was facing the one decision she had always feared, whether to confront the one person left to her life who still mattered. Her mother. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. There were phone records, deleted messages. A withdrawal of $10,000 in cash from her mother's account made the day after Rachel disappeared. Carla had ignored the red flags for weeks, blaming it on stress, trauma, or maybe age catching up. But now, with everything swirling around her, threats, vanishing clues, and a growing web of lies, she couldn't shake the feeling that her mother was hiding something far bigger than she had ever imagined. She drove in silence, the radio off, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the turn signal as she pulled into the old driveway. The house looked the same, familiar, safe. And yet, there was a coldness that settled into her bones the moment she stepped out of the car. Her mother was in the kitchen, like always, brewing tea she rarely drank. Carla studied her for a moment, her tired eyes, the way she clutched the porcelain mug too tightly, the way she didn't ask how Nathan was. "I need to ask you something," Carla said, voice barely above a whisper. Her mother nodded slowly, not meeting her gaze. "Did you know Rachel? Before she disappeared?" There was a pause. A long, eerie silence that made Carla's skin crawl. Then, her mother's hands tightened around the mug until it clinked gently against the counter. "I didn't know her. Not well," she finally said. "But she came to me once. Said she needed to talk to someone who'd lived through it." Carla froze. Lived through what? Her mother looked up then, and for the first time in a long time, Carla saw the fear in her eyes. Raw, unfiltered. "The same thing I warned you about when you joined the force. The things that happen behind closed doors. The people who protect monsters because they wear the right badge or write the right checks." Rachel thought she could expose them. Carla's stomach turned. "And what did you do?" "I told her to stop," her mother said quietly. "I told her she didn't know who she was up against. But she didn't listen. Just like you're not listening now." The betrayal cut deeper than any threat. It wasn't just about secrets, it was about silence. Her mother had known something. She had been a link in the chain of people who chose not to act. And now, Carla had to decide whether to walk away, to preserve the last thread of family she had, or press forward, alone, exposed, and in danger. But it was already too late for walking away. That night, an envelope was slipped under her door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single flash drive and a printed photo, one that made her entire body go cold. It was a still frame from an old interrogation room, grainy but clear enough. Rachel was there. So was Carla. But it wasn't from any official interview. Carla had never seen it before, yet there she was, leaning in close to Rachel, whispering something that the camera couldn't catch. She didn't remember it. She couldn't remember it. When she played the footage, it began mid-scene. The timestamp was from months ago, just before Rachel disappeared. The video showed Rachel handing Carla something small, a phone, or maybe a card. Carla stared at herself on the screen, watching as she slipped it into her coat and nodded solemnly, like she understood everything. But the memory was gone.
Erased.
It was impossible, yet undeniable.
Her phone rang.
A number she didn't recognize. She answered, voice shaking. Hello. You are there, a distorted voice said. You saw what Rachel had. You knew what she uncovered. That's why they let you live. The call ended, and Carla collapsed into the chair, gasping for air. If that video is real, then the biggest lie of all might be the one she told herself. What if she hadn't just lost pieces of the puzzle? What if someone had taken them from her mind? What if her memory wasn't safe? Now she faced a nightmare scenario. Either accept the story they handed her, safe in ignorance, or risk everything to uncover the truth, even if it meant turning on the last people she trusted and facing the possibility that she was more involved than she ever realized. But one thing was clear. There were no easy choices left. Carla barely had time to process the footage before the knock came. Not the kind of knock you hear from a neighbor or a friend. It was deliberate, controlled, the type that carried authority without needing a badge. She grabbed the flash drive and slipped it into her boot before heading to the door, heart racing. Two men stood there, suits, no visible credentials, but everything about them screamed federal. They asked for word, said it was urgent, something about protective custody and active threats. But their eyes said otherwise. Cold, clinical, rehearsed. She played along, offering to grab her coat, but the moment she stepped away, she slipped out the back door and ran. She didn't stop until she reached her car. Breath ragged, pulse pounding, she replayed the video again and again, each time noticing something new. A shadow outside the door. A glint of light on someone's wrist. Symbols, small, circular, branded into the folder Rachel had handed her in the video. A symbol Carla had seen before. In her department. On the confidential files marked, internal only. It wasn't just Rachel's story. It was their story. The department. The local council. The tech company funding citywide surveillance. And the kicker? The nonprofit Carla had partnered with for youth outreach, the one she believed in, donated to, even spoke for. They were all tied together. She drove to Mason's house next. He was her old partner, someone she'd trusted for years. The kind of guy who didn't just cover your back in the field, he protected your secrets, too. But the moment he opened the door, she knew something was off. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked prepared. Almost regretful. I need answers, Carla demanded, pushing past him. Mason didn't resist. He closed the door slowly behind them, the air between them thick with unspoken truths. You should have stayed out of it, he said. You were never supposed to dig this deep. Her voice broke. You knew about Rachel? I knew what she found. And I knew what they were willing to do to keep it buried. She was trying to blow the lid off a system that funds everything in this city. Surveillance, enforcement, media. It's not just corruption, Carla. It's infrastructure. It's control. Why didn't you warn me?
He sighed.
Because I thought you already knew. You were there, remember? Her blood ran cold. What are you saying? You were the one who brought her in. You saw what she had. You handed it over. Carla stepped back, shaking her head.
No.
That's not possible. I don't remember. They made sure you wouldn't, he cut in. After you started asking too many questions, they used the same tech Rachel was trying to expose. Memory suppression, targeted amnesiacs, digital redactions. You weren't supposed to wake up. But something must have triggered it. She could barely breathe. If what Mason said was true, she hadn't just missed the truth. She'd helped bury it. He reached into his desk and pulled out a folder, thinner than she expected. Inside were names, faces, locations, people connected to the same symbol. Journalists, whistleblowers, civilians. Every one of them had gone missing, been discredited, or turned up dead in unrelated accidents. And then there was her name, crossed out. A note beside it. Status, neutralize. You're on the list, Mason said. You've always been on the list. But for some reason, they never finished the job. Carla looked up at him, heart-shattering. Are you working with them? His silence was answer enough. She stood, backing toward the door. Mason didn't stop her. Maybe guilt had finally caught up. Or maybe he knew it was too late. Too many pieces were already in play. Outside, rain fell like a warning. Carla didn't care. She needed to act fast. The city wasn't what she thought it was. The people running it weren't just corrupt, they were predators hiding in plain sight, protected by the very systems meant to keep them in check. And now that she was awake, there was no going back. But she wasn't alone anymore. Because tucked into the last page of the folder Mason gave her was something unexpected, a handwritten note with a burner phone number and a message. We've been waiting for you. The resistance is real. Call when you're ready. The conspiracy wasn't just citywide. It was national. Maybe bigger. And the next move she made would either expose it or bury her with it. Carla's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes locked on the cold glow of the facility looming ahead. The building was hidden in plain sight, tucked beneath an old city water treatment plant that hadn't been active in over a decade. She had driven past it hundreds of times in her years on the force, never imagining the extent of the secrets buried underneath. But now, armed with Rachel's final video file, the list of vanished whistleblowers and Mason's reluctant confession, she knew this was where it all led. The truth, every shadowy deal, every falsified death, every silenced voice, was inside. And so was he, the man pulling all the strings. The one no one had dared speak about directly, but whose fingerprints were on every dark corner of this conspiracy. Edward Kessler, the city's celebrated philanthropist, the face of progress, and the silent puppeteer behind the surveillance syndicate. She moved quickly, bypassing the outer gate with a stolen access card Mason had slipped into her jacket before she left. Inside, the air was sterile, almost suffocating, humming with low-frequency static from the network of CCTV feeds broadcasting every hallway. But what unnerved her wasn't the omnipresent cameras. It was the fact that none of them were following her. As if someone already knew she was coming. As if she was being guided. Each corridor brought her closer to the core of the operation. Along the way, she passed rooms filled with computer servers, digital archives, and screens displaying live facial recognition scans across the city. It wasn't just surveillance, it was control, and every citizen was just another data point to manipulate. And then she found it. A room, heavily secured but already unlocked, as though it had been waiting for her. She stepped inside. Kessler stood there alone, no guards, no entourage, dressed in his usual pristine suit like he had nothing to hide. He looked older up close, but not weaker. There was a calculation in his gaze that made Carla's skin crawl. I wondered when you'd finally come, he said, his voice calm, almost fatherly. You've been quite the disruption. You buried Rachel. You tried to erase me. You think you can get away with this? He smiled, gesturing to a sleek console behind him. Go ahead. Everything you want is there. The footage, the files, the full story. You can even live stream it to the public if you like. But before you do, let me show you one last thing. Against every instinct screaming inside her, Carla stepped closer, eyes flicking to the monitor. Kessler tapped a few commands, and a live feed came up, her apartment. But it wasn't empty. A man was there.
Ben.
Her younger brother. Bound, unconscious, with a masked figure pacing nearby. Kessler turned to her. This isn't just about truth anymore, Carla. It's about choice. You stream this and he dies. You walk away and he lives. That's how deep this goes. You're not the only one they're watching. Her breath caught in her throat. The world around her narrowed to a single, devastating decision. For years, she believed the system could be saved, that exposing the truth was the answer. But now, truth came with a price. One she wasn't sure she could pay. "I won't let you win," she whispered. "Winning isn't even the point," Kessler replied. "This system doesn't need to be hidden to survive. It thrives on fear, on compliance, on the idea that someone is always watching. You think people will fight that?
No.
They'll surrender to it." Carla stared at the monitor, her mind racing. Then her eyes caught a detail, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. The figure in the feed wore a pin. The same circular symbol from Rachel's folder. Not a captor.
An ally.
Suddenly it clicked. The entire scene was staged. A manipulation. A final, desperate attempt to scare her into submission. She turned back to Kessler, fury rising. "You really thought I'd break that easy?" She grabbed the console, slammed the command to launch the live stream, and within seconds, every dirty secret, every video, every name and file was sent to a dozen verified journalists, uploaded across social media, and pushed into public domain. There was no turning back. Kessler didn't flinch. He simply sat down, as if it were inevitable. "You'll still lose," he murmured. "They always do. The machine is bigger than you." But Carla didn't answer. She walked out without another word, adrenaline surging through her veins. The building's alarms had already started. Backup was on its way. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing. This wasn't over. The fallout from the leak was instant and chaotic. News outlets scrambled to verify the flood of files Carla had released, while social media platforms erupted with viral hashtags like #SurveillancesState, #RachelWasRight, and #SystemExposed. Overnight, the public's eyes were open to a truth far darker than they were ready for. Cities across the country began demanding investigations. Public officials issued panic denials, and the surveillance corporation at the center of it all, Silico Dynamics, saw its stock plummet by nearly 50%. Within a week, congressional hearings were announced, whistleblowers began coming forward, and people who had once been ghosts in redacted reports were suddenly given a voice. Carla had lit the fuse, but she knew better than to believe the explosion would be the end. This was just the first breach in a wall that had stood for far too long. In the weeks that followed, Carla remained underground, not out of fear, but because she knew the game wasn't over. The system hadn't collapsed, it had adapted. Many of the people implicated in the conspiracy simply vanished, retiring into silence. Some relocated under government protection, others erased completely from public view. The justice system, still tethered to the very infrastructure she had exposed, moved slowly. There were no high-profile arrests, no public trials. Only internal investigations, whispered resignations, and strategic scapegoats. Still, something had changed. People began to look differently at the cameras on every street corner, to question why their data was being tracked, who had access, and what power meant in the hands of the unseen. And that change, however small, was a start. Nathan was found alive in a safe house used by the underground resistance network Carla had only just begun to understand. The staged hostage video, designed to manipulate her final choice, had been part of a test. A way to see how far she was willing to go, whether she would choose safety or truth. And when she chose the truth, everything shifted. Rachel had survived. Carla returned to the precinct only once, not as an officer, but as a witness in one of the internal hearings. She sat across from some of the same faces who once dismissed her, lied to her, and pretended they didn't know what was happening behind closed doors.
She didn't yell.
She didn't gloat. She simply gave them what they feared most: proof. It was enough to trigger an independent review of the entire department's case files. And in the shadows of the building she once called home, she finally saw justice begin to stir. She never returned to active duty. Some part of her knew she couldn't, building a quiet army of insiders who were tired of being silenced. Her last message to Carla was brief, just a video clip recorded in low light, her voice tired but steady. "You finished what I couldn't. But we're not done. They'll rebuild. They always do. We just have to be louder than the silence."
Barely.
But she had spent the last year living in the digital shadows, feeding evidence to people like Carla. The badge had meant something once: honor, truth, protection. But now, It was stained with too many secrets. Instead, she disappeared quietly, moving to a small coastal town under a different name, working odd jobs, keeping a low profile. Not because she was running, but because she had finally found stillness. The kind of stillness that came after the storm, after the fight, when the truth had been spoken and the world had no choice but to listen. Yet, even in her peace, Carla kept watching, kept listening. She knew the battle wasn't over. That power never dies, it only hides. And somewhere, buried deep in systems not yet uncovered, were more secrets waiting to rise. But for now, the story was out. The names were known. And the girl who once vanished beneath the flicker of CCTV had become the spark that pulled the curtain back. On her last night in the city, before she disappeared completely, Carla stood at the rooftop of her old apartment building and looked out across the skyline. Drones zipped silently overhead. Cameras blinked from lampposts. The city was still being watched. But now it was watching back. Because once a story like this reaches the light, it never really ends. It just waits. And somewhere, someone else will see what they're not supposed to. Hear something they weren't meant to. Ask a question no one wants answered. And when they do, Carla's story, Rachel's story, will rise again. This time, louder. Unignorable. Unstoppable.